And Diamond here with you on BBC Radio Berkshire, 22 minutes to 1. Now, the Houses of Parliament are in such a state of disrepair that apparently the buildings could burn down for a second time, according to officials who say MPs are getting stuck in lifts and missing votes because of the scale of refurbishment required. Let's talk now to Richard Watkins, who worked in the government for 20 years and is now an official City of Westminster tour guide. Hello there, Richard.
Hello there, Anne. Very good morning.
Funnily enough,
very good afternoon.
It is indeed afternoon. I should know this. We should all know this. I don't know enough about the history of those particular buildings, but what caused the first fire?
Oh, well, that's a very interesting thing. It was actually a pile of sticks. To be precise, a pile of tally sticks, which were the way of recording receipt of taxes from the shires, you see, and were all being stored up. This was a system that had been used for centuries, going back to the early 1100s until the late 1700s, and by 1834 they were all piled up in a treasury room, and then the top bods in the civil service said, well, we need this space now, we've got to dispose of these sticks, and they burnt them in a furnace underneath the House of Lords that was simply the heating furnace, but it was all kind of people getting involved who didn't really know what they were doing and burning the wrong sort of material in that kind of thing. And it was sort of described by the Prime Minister of the day, Lord Melbourne, as one of the greatest instances of stupidity on record. But that's what triggered the fire anyway.
Yeah, and that was, what, in 1834?
1834, in fact, yes. Just a few weeks ago, we passed the 180th anniversary of that
fire. Gosh.
Yes, it was on the 16th of October.
Well, how does it make you feel hearing this report that's saying the place is in such a bad state it could all happen again?
Well, yes, it's quite uncanny. It's quite funny. It's sort of like the 1830s all over again, because at the time, I mean, this fire didn't sort of come out of the blue. Officials had been discussing and architects had been warning about the unsuitable, unsafe, sort of claustrophobic, fire, sort of risky atmosphere of the old medieval Houses of Parliament, and reports had been done with recommendations, but nothing had been done about it. I suppose, the country was a bit skint at the time after fighting so many wars and so on. But yeah, nothing was done about it until the question was really forced by the thing all sort of burning down. But there we are. My
son works in the Houses of Parliament, and so I've been up and down to his office many times. And there's no doubt that inside the Houses of Parliament, for however grand it looks on the outside, and some of its staterooms are very big and grand, on the inside it's higgledy-piggledy with tiny little staircases and funny little wooden doors. And you can see that it's a problem, and yet a very, very expensive problem to put right, presumably. If they let health and safety people in there, I suppose, it really might take a long time to get up to standard.
Yes, well, it's very interesting. I mean, the design of the current Houses of Parliament was all meant to be streamlined and coherent, and the Lords and the Commons were in one aligned straight line, you see, going from south to north, whereas the old one wasn't, and the House of Commons was in a sort of unsuitably adapted but wonderful Gothic chapel, and I don't know how they crowded, nearly 600 odd MPs in there. But now, after the lapse of sort of 150, 60 odd years, now these sort of buildings, which were meant to be all streamlined and fit for purpose and all laid out in line with the committee rooms on the higher floors and sort of based around, now they do look rather sort of cramped and sort of perhaps unsuitable, I suppose.
And but, I guess, I mean, the building, while we love it when it's looking clean and gorgeous, but it is made from this Anston limestone, which apparently is subject to erosion. So inevitably, in the end, you're going to get nooks and crannies and corners and frameworks around windows and things that are just going to develop holes and be a problem.
Well, I suppose so. I mean, I'm not a qualified architect in any way, so I don't know how the science of that sort of deteriorates, but I know that experts were aware of that problem even right from the beginning, and some of the deteriorated the stone was actually replaced sort of about, program finished about 1960. So yes, it's quite amazing. I mean, when you sort of take a tour around, as the public can do around the House of Parliament, you can actually go into. They rebuilt St Stephen's Hall, which was the medieval hall, which was made into the House of Commons. They rebuilt it so you can walk through there and just imagine. Well, okay, the two chambers at the moment don't quite fit all the MPs in, but this is about half the size, and so it was still a hell of a lot better. And they are amazing, iconic, influential buildings. I think we have to remember, which have to be saved, of course.
Yes.
I would think, it's a top listed, grade 1 listed site, and it was set in motion a whole fashion for sort of Victorian Gothic architecture and influenced other parliamentary buildings. I mean, we've been seeing pictures of the Canadian Houses of Parliament on the news for not very pleasant sort of news, but that was heavily influenced by that, as was the Hungarian one and so on.
Yeah. I gather there are 3,000 windows in the Houses of Parliament, and most of them don't shut properly.
Yeah.
Which again causes more damage and I guess throws up lots of security issues as well. And then you've got lots and lots of asbestos used right throughout the building, apparently. So if they did decide to do any work on it and bring it up to date, you would have all those extra costs at a time when I can't see MPs having the courage to vote through a costly renovation programme for the Houses of Parliament, because people would just say, oh, there they go, spending money on themselves again.
Well, there it seems like history repeating itself again, because a committee proposal was brought in the early 1830s, and on the issue of cost.
And yet we would all we would all hate for it not to be looking as great and magnificent as it does when the sun's shining at the right angle now. It would be sad to lose it, wouldn't it? We really would hate to lose it.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine that as much as I'm not...
but watching it crumble away in front of our eyes isn't good either, is it?
No. But yes, this is fascinating, very interesting.
Yeah, my son keeps telling me this story about how the River Thames gets closer every year or something. It's eroding the bank closer and closer to the Palace of Westminster every year.
Okay. Well, I don't know about that, but I know that they sort of reclaimed 8 acres of land into the river to build it, and so the lovely, so that you can really see it. I think that's one of the loveliest aspects.
Oh, yes.
Looking from the Lambeth Bank or on Westminster Bridge. But I, of course, being a City of Westminster tour guide, then it would be an absolute tragedy because, I and my colleagues enjoy talking to people about it and touring around it. And on the subject of which, if you don't mind me mentioning, I'm actually doing a tour at the moment called The Great Fire of Westminster with my organisation Trails of the City with my colleague Steve, and also advertised through Footprints of London. And it's all telling the story of the fire in 1834, which is really quite a farcical, a mixture of farce and sort of acts of heroism as well, and it seems all the more apt and relevant now with this kind of story.
It certainly does. Yeah, in a way, that's
doing is tomorrow.
Well, maybe you need to do your tour to a few MPs as well, so that they can actually learn about what's happening to the fabric of the building around them.
Well, any MPs, please feel free to get in touch, and you can go onto our website, www.trailsofthecity.co.uk.
Beautifully plugged, Richard, if I may say so.
And have a look for the Footprints of London one as well.
Indeed.
But tomorrow we'll have double resonance. Not only that, but of course it's bonfire night, and the night on which Guy Fawkes, was planning
to blow up the whole place.
to do by sort of malign sort of intention, what happened by accident. But there we are.
Many hundreds of years later. Fascinating stuff, as is history all the time. Richard, thanks very much indeed.